Here, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, will try to be brief, but I want to associate my comments with Mr. Langworthy's, especially about the 128 hostage. It bothers me that we got this far into this discussion, and we did not even acknowledge that there are still 128 hostages being held by the terrorist organization Hamas. I want to mention the UN briefly. I found where the UN has said arms exports to Israel must stop immediately. But I cannot find anywhere where the UN has said that exports of weapons and arms to Hamas or the other terrorist organizations that Iran supports should be stopped. I think that it's way past time that we as the United States demand balance from the UN instead of bias. And it's disappointing to me that they would demand that arms exports to Israel be stopped, but not expect Iran to stop exporting to the terrorist organizations out there. I heard a lot about Afghanistan, and I heard a lot about NATO, and I want to read something to the committee. And it's a direct quote from General Kenneth McKenzie's, four-star Marine, former commander of U.S. Central Command. This is what he said in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. I'll give you my honest opinion, and my honest opinion of you shaped my recommendation to the President. This is President Biden. I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, and I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government. The bottom line is Joe Biden ignored the advice of his military commanders, and that's what led to the collapse of Afghanistan. That's open testimony. Mr. McCall, I believe y'all heard similar testimony from both McKenzie and Milley. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and I was briefed by them at the time in the skiff where they said if this occurs, Afghanistan will fall, and it will fall very rapidly.
And after Afghanistan fell, I was actually in Brussels the day that Russia went into Ukraine. And those of us on the NATO Parliamentary Board were over there in a bipartisan manner trying to discuss things with our NATO partners. And all our NATO partners were doing was fussing at us about what we did to them in Afghanistan. We did not negotiate with our NATO partners about a time to leave. Our president simply told them, we're leaving on this day and you do the best you can. After they fought with us for decades in that country. That, with all due respect, is what diminished the relationship with NATO. Now, I will acknowledge that it has been rebuilt some because of the have to draw back together, but our refusal to even have meaningful discussions with our NATO partners in the withdrawal of Afghanistan is what led to a huge division there and reluctance to trust us and our intel on Ukraine. I guess I'll ask you this, Mr. Meeks. I don't understand why Biden is having this discussion publicly. I don't understand why he came out and said publicly he was going to halt the arms shipments. Can you explain the rationale? I mean, he didn't even say, if Hamas releases the 128 hostages, then I will stop the arms shipment. He just came out and said, I'm going to halt the arms shipment. I could understand a private conversation maybe, but I don't understand the public conversation.
So I think that what the president said, at least what I heard him say, that he was stopping the delivery of a single delivery of 2,000-pound bombs, that there were additional munitions and artillery that would not stop. In fact, I think he further stated, because at that time that he made the statement, Israel had already taken over the Egyptian part of the gate. And he said that was okay. because there was not loss of life, and it would control the situation a little bit better. So I think, and I want to say that, you know, there's some things that I've heard everyone say, I heard you say, that we all agree with. I agree with Mr. McCall that Hamas targets innocent civilians. I agree with him that they hide that they hide and don't care about Palestinians' death.
Well, can I ask you something?
I agree with that. But what I think is, you know, and one of the reasons why I oppose the 2000 bomb is because our values are different than the values of Hamas.
Urban warfare is tough. You know that. I mean, in the position you're sitting in, and it's extremely dense population. There's a lot of innocent people that get killed in war. But why didn't he condition it based on Hamas releasing the 128 hostages?
There is, I agree with you. Every ounce of what he has been doing is to try to get those hostages released. And he says it each and every time. There's not one time that I've not heard him say, I don't care. He says we must get those hostages. That's the reason why he's kept a number of individuals from his administration at the table trying to get those. I want those hostages released. The people of Israel want those hostages released. They must be released. And there's no one that has any sympathy for Hamas.
But that's why he should have said, release the 128 hostages or I'm going to continue to send the weapons.
All he was saying is we don't, as a result of values, we don't want innocent lives. We hate. I mean, when I think about the images that I saw with Mr. McCall when we went of the heinous crimes that Hamas committed on those 1,200 Israeli people. And the fact that they are still under these tunnels, we don't know whether they're dead or alive.
Some of them are dead.
That's right. We don't know. And that gets to me. And I want to destroy them.
I think they announced another one
I don't want to destroy
yesterday.
them. I want to destroy them. But I don't want to kill innocent people either.
So,
because I saw the innocent people that have died as a result of war.
Well, let me tell you what I think the politics of this is. And I know we may disagree on this, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record an article for Politico. Michigan primary leaves Dems begging Biden to set foot in the swing state. The article reads, Democratic leaders nationally and in Michigan are urging Joe Biden to show up in communities upset about his handling of the Israel-Hamas war, a step the president resisted taking in the run-up to the state primary election this week. That election exposed Biden's potential vulnerability on the issue as more than 100,000 people cast uncommitted protest ballots rather than support the president. I think this has more to do with the next presidential election and problems that President Biden has in the far left of the Democratic Party.
And consent request without objection, so ordered.
Okay. And look, it's late. I know there are going to be differences of opinion on that in this room among people I respect, but I feel like that's the reason that he stopped the arms weapons is to accommodate a group on the far left that hates Israel. And I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just wondering if the chairman had anything that he wanted to add from some of the things that were just discussed, if you...
I think it's all been said. I go back to the way this was all done. No briefing, no information from the administration. The only way I could get briefed on what was happening with weapons being held back was to read the press. And that's not good, especially when you're dealing with your greatest ally in the Middle East and you're talking about withholding weapons. It's not until the president went on CNN saying, if they go into Rafah, I will withhold the weapons, that I heard from the president himself in his own words, did I know that in fact that was accurate? A lot of this has to do with notice to Congress, especially after the Four Corners House and Senate have approved these weapons, and appropriations have been made by Congress to fund these weapons, specifically with the intent that they go into Israel. And then in the darkness, with no transparency, they make this decision without any consultation with Congress. I don't think that's the right way to govern, particularly on a matter of this importance. And I think it is going to cause damage. It has caused damage, I know. So I've talked to the Israelis with our relationship, but also it's emboldened Iran and Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, who can claim victory without ever firing a shot. And I think that's very tragic.
Thank you very much. And I would yield to Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you. I appreciate it. There was a comment about the polling numbers that most Americans trust Biden instead of Trump. That just rang weird to me. I mean, I read like 1 or 2 polls a day, and I just knew that was patently false. So I have the polling data now. Let's start with this. Here's a CNBC poll from March 2024. Approval rating of Joe Biden on foreign affairs. It's 30%. CNN poll, April 18th through 23rd, 2024. When asked about the past administration's success in foreign affairs, 55% had a favorable view. That might sound low, but when asked about this administration's failures, it was 61%. 61% of Americans viewed Joe Biden's foreign policy as a failure. 61%. Sure.
It's actually my time.
I'm sorry. It's Ms. Fishbach's time. All right. Here's a Gallup poll from March 2024. Who shows good judgment in crisis? Trump is at 45. Biden is only at 40. Here's a Wall Street Journal poll from 2024, March 2024. Who would you trust more on the Israel-Hamas war? Trump 45, Biden 31. The polling numbers speak for themselves. It's patently false and ludicrous that there'd be a comment that most Americans trust Joe Biden over President Trump. And
I was actually planning on yielding to you, but now I guess I won't.
And I just want to end on this because it's so rich. I'd ask unanimous consent for the record to enter an article from The Atlantic by Gail Beckerman. The title of this article